Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. We're going to be talking about the 5 mistakes most salespeople and sales leaders make that sabotage the results. So my name is Nicole Sterling and I'll be your facilitator for today. We are recording today's session, and once we've done a bit of a quality assurance check, we'll get that out to you ASAP. So it usually takes a couple of days just to make sure everything is in order. The agenda today is 60 minutes long. You've all seen the session when you registered, so I'm not going to go into detail because I'd much rather spend the time with the conversation for today, but we will have you out of here on time. Before we go on though, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do, and we being Flexile. So Flexile was designed from the ground up to make quoting faster, easier, and more accurate. So basically we help you to sell more. Flexile provides a single online place to manage all your products and pricing, and it integrates into all your other systems that need to know about products. In a data-driven world, having accurate and consistent data across all your systems is obviously highly valuable. And I'll let Matt go into a bit of a demo later in the session if you've got time to hang out. All right, so introducing our speakers. First up, we have Bernadette McClelland. In addition to being the author of 5 books, including bestseller The Art of Commercial Conversations, Bernadette is also an internationally respected keynote speaker, facilitator, trainer, sales mentor, and coach to CXOs. Her passion for helping salespeople lift their game and be seen as the good guys and girls has seen her as the Asia Pacific Peak Performance Business and Sales Coach for Anthony Robbins and coach for Harvard MBAs in their sales program. And then we also have on the line as our interviewer, Matt Hollis. He is the CEO of Flexile, a configure, price, quote platform for IT and telecommunications organizations designed to speed up sales and save money and time. And so on that note, I will hand it over to Matt and Bernadette to kick off.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks.
So as always, very excited to be talking sales and really just to sort of focus in on to how to sell more, which is what we're all about. So you've seen the things Bernadette's going to talk about. To me, this is really critical stuff, right? Really exciting. So Bernadette, we always kick off with a sales horror story. So, you know, a little bit of a lighthearted start. Take us through something that's either happened to yourself or you've witnessed that's gone wrong.
Oh, wow. Where do I start there? So one that does come to mind, and it is one that I share, it was my background was Fuji Xerox. So I was sales and so I was a salesperson, sales executive, sales leader in Fuji Xerox and here in Melbourne. And it wasn't long after I'd come out of sales training. And so this is, you know, last century and we're in the 80s and we'd been taught about building rapport. And so back then it was very, I don't know, there was kind of like a structure. You went in, you were taught that if you saw golf clubs in the corner, or if you saw a plaque on the wall, or if you saw a photo or something like that, you kind of zoned in on it. And it was kind of like, I don't know, manufacturing rapport. And it never sat right with me, by the way. So anyway, I've gone in, the Ballarat University was one of my accounts, and I had an appointment with the Pro Vice Chancellor there because we were looking at putting some big kit into the big print room up there. So I've gone into the Pro Vice Chancellor's office and I've shaken his hand and how you going? And I saw this photo behind on his credenza. And it was a photo of him with his arm around Dermot Brereton. Now, for those of you that follow AFL back in the 80s, Dermot Brereton, Hawthorn, you know, the mullet, the curly hair, the full bit happening, and my husband and my kids, mad Hawthorn supporters. And so anyway, I've just looked at this photo and I've said, oh man, I said, you know, my husband would kill to have a photo of him with his arm around Dermot Brereton. And the guy turned around, he looked at his credenza, he looked back at me, and it was just silence. And he said, that's my wife. So that for me was a huge lesson in just, you know, throw the rules out the window, just throw the manufacturing out the window, just absolutely go in and just be yourself. So yeah, that's one of the stories. There's many more like that, trust me. So yeah, that's probably led me to where I am today as well, because, you know, I hate the word authenticity because we are all authentic, but, you know, how can we strip away some of these masks that we've built up over the years that prevent us from being ourselves, and you know, that sabotage us actually getting to know what's going on inside our customer's head as well. So yeah, Matt, there you go. How was that?
That's a really good one, and I wasn't on mute, and I should have been, because that was pretty funny. That's excellent. I love that story.
At the time it wasn't. Trust me.
We'll put that up as a video and make sure we share that widely, because that is an absolute classic. I can, like, you know, Dermot Brereton, I grew up in Melbourne in the 80s, and, you know, it's a really, the picture's burned into my brain. So that's brilliant. Now, we've got a little bit to get through, so let's kind of rip into the meat of it. One of the things that, you know, you talk about a little bit, which always interests me, is that about the CEO's role in sales, and you know, and what do they need to know? And I think this to me is really key, because we're often, with Flexile, we're pitching to an organization. Organizations always want to sell more. Often CEOs, if they don't come out of sales background, you know, they're not quite sure what are the levers, what do they need to know? What are your thoughts on, you know, what a CEO needs to know about sales?
You know, I work a lot with CEOs. I speak at the CEO Institute as well. And what I find is, it doesn't matter what group of leaders are in that room, a large percentage of them aren't really familiar with, or don't really abide by, a sales process. Now, when I talk about the sales process, I'm not talking about, you know, making sure that people are doing their calls. I'm not talking about that kind of a process. I'm talking about a pipeline. You know, our pipeline, that is, you know, you want to be able to predict your revenue. And you need to be able to, the levers that you need to look at are the key performance activities that the teams need to be doing to achieve the KPIs. And in too many instances, the end of the month comes, or the end of the quarter comes, and you know, we're looking in the rearview mirror, and you're looking at the numbers that were made or the numbers that weren't made, and then trying to dissect it going backwards. And what we really need to do is to have some kind of a milestone-based process, a sales process that takes you from lead generation through to the order. And really zoning in each one of those milestones has key performance activities aligned to it. And leadership today, because there is a lack of sales process, as a result of that, the accountability is not there. And so what you end up having are leaders or sales managers or business owners that are now micromanaging, because they're kind of doing it in reverse. So when you think of my data set, for example, is 2 million salespeople, the data set that I use. And what we find is that I think there was 16,000 sales managers were assessed, and the average time they spend on accountability, the average amount of their leadership time is only 6% of their time on accountability to process. And then when you look at the salespeople, I think it was 1.1 million, more than 80% of those salespeople want accountability.
Yeah, wow.
You know, so there's this huge gap. And the thing is, well, okay, accountability, how do we hold them accountable if it's not carrot and stick? And so it's that whole thing. Well, what is your pipeline process? What is your sales process? And when I ask a CEO that question, or when I ask salespeople or sales leaders that question, take me through your process, inevitably, they also come in on what happens after the order's signed.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, this has all got to be upfront. And so this is why when we talk about key performance activities, what are those activities? Well, we know it's calls, we know it's first calls, we know it's conversations, we know it's negotiation, we know it's demonstrations. You know, we know it's having a positioning statement, we know it's CRM entry, we know all of that. So why isn't it happening?
Yeah. And is it just because they don't understand it? They haven't been taught, you know, that obviously, you know, you were lucky enough to go through some great sales training back in the day. Is it, like I said, no one sat down with them and said, you need to care about these things? Is it that simple?
Well, you talked before, you said, you know, a lot of CEOs haven't come from the sales space. A lot of CEOs have come from the sales space as well.
Right.
And so you think about the era that they've come from, and it's very much, they were salespeople on the floor. And there were salespeople on the floor in the 80s and 90s, when it really was a case of just get out there and you know, show your brochure and you know, make the calls. There was no internet. There was no, you know, our buyers today are so much more educated. They know more than the salespeople today. And so you've got salespeople out there that, you know, that have come from that sales leaders rather, or CEOs that have also come from that space where it's just go out and get the deal, just go out and get the deal. But it's not that simple today.
No.
You know, so there's a whole raft of different angles to come from. Like storytelling is big now. You know, we talk about positioning statement or value propositions or how we go to market, and it's very much being focused on us.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, okay, how do we, you know, we're always told that nobody cares about our product, nobody cares about us, but we've still got to position ourselves. So how do we do that in a way that's marrying both parties? And storytelling does that, really great storytelling. So it's one of the mistakes that I see is that salespeople overshare their expertise in the wrong way.
Yeah, and that's, you know, it's a classic, right? And 100% true. I think, you know, the way we sell is changing. We've got to adapt. And so, you know, you talk a lot about not listening enough. I mean, what should they be doing? You know, if you potentially are an oversharer, if you're a little bit old school and there's a lot of talking about yourself and the product, you need to change. What are some of the things they can do?
So first and foremost, this comes back to the process as well, by the way. So everything that, you know, I share today, it might be at a psychological, like a level that is sales psychology, but ultimately it will also fit into the sales process. So if we talk about salespeople oversharing their expertise, that happens for a number of reasons. That happens because it's their comfort level. It's what they know the most about. And it's a default. And so what I see happening is that rapport is built. Like most salespeople are in that high I category, that interactive, love talking with people. They're kind of that extrovert type personality. So for that particular person to be quiet when they ask a question is very difficult as well. And so I do a lot of improv work. You do some work with the Melbourne Improv. And so one of the things that you learn there is, one of the tools is to actually just don't say anything for 5 seconds. Now that's very difficult for a salesperson. If you ask a question, most times you're actually thinking ahead as well as to what you're going to say next. And when you're doing that, you can't listen. So if you give yourself permission to ask some really good questions and have a question bank, but B, to really be in that moment and listen for what they're saying and also for what they're not saying.
Yeah, great points. And I love how you're talking about that gap and just holding that silence. Really one of my favorite sales tactics. You know, you ask the hard question, and I always, in my mind, mentally, I feel like you put the hard question on the table, you just look at it, you know, and, you know, you don't want to speak first. You really want to pressure them to speak. So I think that's a great strategy.
And it doesn't have to be the hard question.
Okay. That's
the point. It can be any question. And so it's just giving that space. And one of the deciding factors of all of that, and this is where it's more than just listening, it's also emotional discipline. So emotional discipline is totally different than emotional intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about discipline around emotions, I mean, it sort of leads us into probably our next key point, which is salespeople discount too readily. I mean, it's an age-old problem. We've all seen it. You know, that high performer that sells a lot, but the margin's low. You know, they're always discounting. You know, and then there's some other people that they'll you know, a small group that will struggle really hard to get maximum price in every deal. What can people do, you know, if they feel like they're going too quickly to the discount? What are some strategies they can employ?
So on that point, 63% of salespeople have a weakness in emotional discipline.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so it's kind of a couple of things married in here. One is the emotional discipline, the other is money beliefs. And so when you think of emotional, like those of you guys on the call, have you ever got out of a client's meeting, jumped in your car in the days that we could, and thought to yourself, oh man, I should have asked that question.
Yep.
Or, oh, bloody hell, why did I say that? So that is a case of us not being present in the conversation and jumping to what we want too quickly. And so if we bring that into the realm of what you just brought up, we discount too readily. Why is that? And that's for a couple of different reasons. If I was to say to you guys on the call now, for everybody on this call, just to kind of type into the chat, one mantra that you have heard growing up, I'll give you one. And if you guys want to key it in while I'm talking, key in one that you can remember. One is money is the root of all evil. Okay, so hands up for those who've heard that one. Okay, everyone. So have a think about some of the ones you grew up with. Penny wise, pound foolish. You know, love comes in the front door, money comes in the front door, love goes out the back door. You know, so there's all of these things, mantras that we've grown up with that why don't we remember them all these years later? You know, we haven't heard them for decades, in my case. And so it's like, because they're ingrained in us, they're part of our conditioning. So that plays a part in a salesperson's psyche when money is put on the table. Other things such as, what is a lot of money to you? It could be $1,000 is a ton of money to you, and you're selling something for 100K. Yeah, money doesn't grow on trees. All that glitters is not gold. There are thousands of those. So let me give you an example. At Xerox. So I was, you know, I always made my revenue targets. And then of course we would have the gates that you had to hit certain gates in order to win the big trips. And so the gates might've been, you know, 3 large pieces, 5 medium size and 10 small. Always got the medium and the small, but I never got the large because in my mind, I thought that that was a lot of money. And therefore, I wasn't even going to attempt to ask my buyer, to ask my customer for that. Instead, I sold 2 medium ones. So the thing is, we got to let our buyers say no. It's not up to what they have to spend is none of our business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Look, it really does. It's a great point. And I think the point you're really honing in on there is the salesperson's almost preempting that there's going to be a discount request because of their own beliefs.
Yeah.
So is it that simple? Is it just about, you know, using that control and, you know, squashing it down a little bit and waiting to be asked? Is it that simple, or is there other strategies they should be?
You know, there's a couple of strategies that, you know, this was one of the light bulbs for me. Okay, personally, and the light bulb didn't go off when I was in corporate as a salesperson. It actually went off in my own business. So what I would suggest to anybody listening is that you actually get comfortable talking about money, because it is such an emotional trigger. Money is, you know, I'll hand somebody a fresh $100 note in a training, and I'll say, so okay, what comes up when I hold this? What would you do with this $100? And it, buy a pair of shoes, pay off a bill, you know, it doesn't really matter. There's always some form of emotion attached to it, when in actual fact, it's a piece of paper that's got some printed words on it. And it is simply an exchange of value. Now, if you have demonstrated enough value, you have asked the right amount of questions, because only 41% of salespeople sell value, by the way. So if you've done that correctly, then you will feel that, and once again, it's an emotional thing. there is this whole shift that when you realize that nothing will change in that buyer's world until they sign. Up until that point in time, you're just doing free demos, or you're giving away brochures, or you're putting trials in. You are not making any change in that buyer's world until they sign. That is when their transformation happens, after the signing. And so that's all we're selling, all of us. We're not selling services or products or anything like that. We're selling change. And so our buyer is not buying what we're selling. Our buyer is actually buying certainty.
Yeah.
And they're buying our level of certainty and value in what we're selling. That's what they're buying. So I would suggest start getting comfortable about talking about money. Those of us girls who buy shoes and tell our husbands or our partners that they were half price. Start telling them they were full price. And also add another 0 to the end of what you think is a lot of money. If you think $1,000 is a lot of money, add a 0 to the end until you get comfortable.
Yeah, some good tips. Excellent. And you know, talking a lot about how to sell more, which is great. One of the things that you mentioned when we first caught up was this sort of one of your beliefs that salespeople focus too much on selling and not enough on coaching, which was not really a philosophy I'd heard much of before. So could you sort of share that with us and the audience today? I'm sort of keen to understand more about that.
Yeah. So, for anybody who's done any work in the coaching field, there is a difference between being a mentor and being a coach. Now, being a mentor, and all of us, when we've had, you know, colleagues come sit with us, or we've shadowed people, whatever, we've mentored them. And that means that we have not just asked them questions, but we've also shown them, and we've told them what we know about that particular role or job or whatever it might be. A coach, so a mentor tells and coaches and asks. A coach asks. Okay, and most salespeople just outright tell. And there's this ratio, like a tell-ask ratio. And so coaching is all about asking questions. And when you are aware of why you're asking questions, you start to be invested in those questions, and you start to become more present, and you start to become more curious. And when you can do that, and you also understand, as part of a coaching, I guess, philosophy is understanding the human psychology, and that is, you know, how people tick or what makes people tick. And when you understand that people are driven by pretty much 2 drivers. One is moving toward something, or moving toward achieving something, or moving toward something that's pleasurable, or it's moving away from some kind of problem or away from some kind of pain. Now, the majority of people in the world, we're all driven by moving away from problems. Look at us with COVID at the moment. We'd do anything, you know, to not to have to be in lockdown, as opposed to doing anything to be out of lockdown, to be free. Does that make sense? And so when you consider that most of the population are driven by wanting to avoid pain or avoid some kind of problem, and then you look at salespeople, how do they go to market? They go to market with, this is the best, the brightest, this is where you should be going, this is the outcome you need. And so now you've got a disconnect happening. And it's like, you know, we are saying all the wonderful things that can happen, but our buyers are thinking about all the ways that they can avoid the current problem. And so that's why when I talk about oversharing expertise, our buyers are not going to buy based on all the good stuff we can bring them. Our buyers are only going to buy when they know in their heart that we have understood what it is they don't want, as well as what it is that we do want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It really does. And apologies for the background noise. I joke that when I do webinars, trucks come and park outside my window, and it's happened. I shouldn't have joked about it.
I didn't hear it.
Oh, good. Hopefully it's quite noisy in here. Yeah, really good. Again, any sort of tips, because I think these are really great points, right? Like, focus less on you talking and you selling and more on asking questions. Is there a structure or a process, or how can people sort of adopt this and roll this into their sales calls or meetings or catch-ups?
Yeah, it's it's not that simple. I mean, we all know discovery questions. So let me try it this way. If you were to realize that when you meet somebody, whether it's on Zoom or in person or whatever, we build rapport. There's tension. Okay, so there's tension. So let's kind of go back pre-COVID, because I think we can. I don't know where everybody's at the moment, but we all know that scenario. So a salesperson calls on a buyer, and the tension is high. Who is the tension predominantly high for? Salesperson or the buyer?
Salesperson?
Both. Both. So the salesperson is sitting there thinking, God, who's behind the door? Am I going to feel intimidated? What's the go? The buyer is sitting there thinking, geez, I've got 20 minutes. What's he going to try and flog me? So there's a bit of tension there. Is he going to waste my time? So tension's high. And the tension is only reduced when rapport is built. Okay, that can take 5 seconds. It can take 5 minutes. Then what happens is a little bit of trust is built, right? Then what happens, the buyer says, or the salesperson starts, or there's this transition period between rapport and business talk. And lo and behold, the salesperson starts talking product or starts talking about themselves. They have immediately commoditized themselves, which leads the buyer to saying, great, we're right there, we've already got one, or how much is it? And so we've missed this whole apex, we've missed this whole, bell curve, the top part of the bell curve, all this beautiful real estate, where we haven't taken advantage of that by asking questions. So some of those questions that get missed are ROI questions. So how do we build up a new kind of tension, like kids on Christmas Eve, where the buyer can't wait to hear what we've got to say next? And how can we build up enough tension so that in our proposals, it's full of meat? It's all based on the buyer. So the questions that are typically missed out are the implications of the current problems, and the aspirations or the outcomes that the buyer actually wants, and the reasons why both of those are so important to that person on a business level, for the business and personally. And that's a space not many people go to, where you can really identify what something means to somebody at a personal level. Because our competition isn't the guy down the road, the girl down the road. It's a little word called maybe. And that's because of what's called status quo bias, where people would much rather just stay with what they've got because of a couple of reasons. One, that there's a perceived cost to changing when there probably isn't. And if, as a salesperson, you've asked the right amount of questions and you've understood metrics, you got really curious about costs, and cost just isn't, the cost of whatever your solution is. The cost involves, time lost, or, productivity, lost, or staff turnover cost. So understanding that. So the reason your buyer will say no or maybe is because they've got a perceived cost. A perception that it's going to cost, the change is going to cost more. Secondly, it's too hard for them. This is just too hard. I don't know about you guys, but, I've had buyers, decision makers over the years that are going to retire. They are never going to buy while they're in that role. It's too hard. And the third one is that they anticipate some kind of regret. And so, and once again, if you've got somebody who's aspiring to climb the ladder, the last thing that they want to do is to jeopardize their promotion. So, you know, by getting very clear about what something means to somebody personally, is a spot that's missed out. And of course, qualifying.
Yeah.
Qualifying.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great answer. And I think you've, you know, any aspiring salesperson should just really focus in on that question and that answer, because that's where all the meat is. I think that was brilliant, really great. So yeah, hopefully everybody enjoyed that as much as I do. I feel like I could talk about this stuff all day. So yeah, really cool. So let's keep moving through some of the stuff we said we'd talk about. One of the other things was, you know, sometimes in sales, well, look, it's hard, right? You know, we've got to constantly put ourselves out of our comfort zone. You know, we've got to drive activity, and, you know, sometimes the no's are kind of brutal. Sometimes they sort of slide off, and sometimes they you know, they really hit home. So how do we do that stuff that you don't want to? Where do we find that motivation? Any tips and tricks in your experience?
We're all the same. Okay, we are all the same, and positive thinking is never going to do the trick. It's just, positive thinking is just, in my book, a load of woo-woo or whatever. What is important is, in my book, is going with the ups and the downs, is just realizing that that is human nature. Because what we're doing is we're putting ourselves in a situation where you could, you know, survival as a species, if there's anything different that comes across our path, we go into fight and flight and freeze. All of us, okay? That goes way back to the caveman days. We all know that. So when you look at what rejection is another form of, you know, the saber-toothed tiger, because you don't know what's behind that door. You don't know what reaction you're going to get. And all of us, our biggest need as human beings is the need to feel enough as human beings. And rejection flies in the face of that. So when you can make friends with the fact that no is okay, it's a pain to do that, because it's like, oh my God, here we go again. God, I've got to pick up that phone again. You know, so it's like that for all of us. And we have this need for approval that we're seeking. And when we get the knockback, you know, that's why it hurts. And the other part of this whole survival mechanism is, you know, you think to yourself, why am I blushing? Why am I sweating? Why am why are my muscles tensing up? Why is my heart going 10 to the dozen? That's because, you know, you're powering down. Your body is actually going into survival mode because of what's being put in front of you, which is different. And when you're going into survival mode, all your energy is being sapped into making the vital organs work for you, which means you can't think, because the brain doesn't need this, it's just sapping it all. So the body doesn't need that rather. So when you look at things from a scientific perspective as well, and you start to identify your own patterns, and you just say, okay, you know, I'm just going through a dip at the moment, and that's okay. Rejection is something that most salespeople, believe it or not, can cope with. So sales people have a very high tolerance for rejection, but where it falls down is how long they stay in that rejected pattern for. So if you feel like you know, prospecting or, you know, speaking in public or whatever it is, and you just kind of power down and you think, man, I just don't want to do this, that's normal. But you get back on the horse as soon as you can. It's only when you don't do it for, like, you don't pick up the phone for a week. And that's when it's, you know, that's when there's an issue.
Yeah, that's the great point. Absolutely. And I know, you know, if I think back to the days of when I was, you know, an outbound BDM and I was smashing the phones, and, you know, I think it was the 90s. So I got given a phone book and told to call people and sell stuff to them. It was exactly that. It was a certain amount of time every day and just stay in the zone. So yeah. Great points. Now we're running close to end of time, and I want to leave time for questions. So I thought we might just quickly touch on role clarity. We talked about accountability and how important that is right up front, but I just wanted to touch in on role clarity and your thoughts on that for a salesperson, because to me it's super important they understand what they have, you know, what they have to do and what their role is, because there's so many in sales today. Yeah, do you have any sort of thoughts or anything you'd like to share just as to wrap up?
This is a leadership thing. So I do a lot of role clarity work in conjunction with pipeline, and why it's necessary, I guess, is that, you know, a job description gets put out. You apply for a job, or you put a job description out there on Seek or whatever to hire a salesperson. Everybody looks at it and they think, yep, all good. You go through, you hire that person, you know, you've got your probation period or whatever it might be, and then suddenly things start not happening. And what tends to happen is you're both not on the same page. So people's perceptions of things, like if I was to, you know, put the word success up and ask every single one of you what that meant, I would get all these different answers. And so then if I was to say, okay, what must have to happen in order for you to achieve success, we'd get a whole lot more different answers. And yet we all agree that we want success. So in a sales role, what's really important is when I get the sales team or the leader, key leaders, or whoever it might be, and we actually start not by looking at the job description or the KPIs or even the key performance activities, we actually look at the purpose of that role. And that's a bigger conversation. And we don't go to what has to happen until we agree on the top 4 to 5 purposes of that role. And when you've got the salesperson and the leader or the business owner agreeing that, yeah, revenue generation is the purpose, and then, you know, there will be others, then we move through, well, okay, let's look at the next stage. And then we eventually get to the key performance indicators, and everybody is in agreement. So for reviews moving forward, you know, for accountability, there's no ambiguity.
Yeah.
And that's great. Yeah. So that's why I think I've put an offer there that, you know, for a few leaders, if they want to reach out to me, for those that actually are in growth mode, that do want to look at really looking at their pipeline or looking at their, you know, their sales team. Yeah, I'm more than happy to have that performance strategy session, a complimentary one for half an hour or so with anybody.
Oh, wow, that's great. No, I really appreciate that. And hopefully some people will take you up on that, because I'm sure that'll be a half an hour spent very well. Now, I wanted to just see if there's any questions. Obviously, we've covered a quite wide-ranging set of topics. Just want to see if anybody wanted to pick Bernadette's brain about anything that she's spoken about, or anything else sales related. I'm sure she's open to any questions.
Yeah, anybody, if you've got, yeah.
Throw them in the chat if you don't want to yell them out yourself, or take yourself off mute and get involved. Dan Woodford.
Thank you very much for the floor. This has been hugely helpful. So, guys, thank you so much for putting this on. I really want to know what happened after you insulted that dude's wife. Did you recover? Because we've all been in those sort of situations, but it's what you do next, which is the really interesting bit.
You know what? It was a case of the floor just opened. There was definitely tension there. I can't lie. It was one of those calls where you just sit there, you know, you've stuffed up, and you are in total surface mode. So needless to say, my manager came on the next one with me, because I think my credibility was absolutely shot.
Did you close it?
We did actually. It took a couple of years, but we did. It took a couple of years.
That's awesome. So, thank you very much.
So I think the key takeaway there is, don't offend them in the first meeting. You'll close them faster.
Yeah, but also don't give up, right? If you're just putting some obstacles in your own way,
yeah.
How do you get around that? Just makes you stronger next time.
You know, and there's also a little bit of, you know, self-deprecation comes into it as well, where you're able to just go, oh man, you know, I stuffed up, or, you know, so, you know, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Great question. Any other questions? I feel like we all wanted to know the answer to that one, so we've got that out of the way early. But any other questions that people would like to throw in the chat, or take themselves off mute, or? No, you answered them too well, Bernadette. They're still just reeling from the amount of knowledge you dropped on them.
Oh, sorry, guys.
No, it was great. It was really good. Well, I mean, I enjoyed it, but, you know, shouldn't speak for
So
everyone.
actually, I'd love to ask each of you guys a question. And if you could put it in the chat, that would be awesome. What is one takeaway that you've taken away from today? If you could put it in the chat, that would be great. Or if you want to, call it out, that's fine as well. But I would love to know one takeaway. Matt, ask more questions.
Yeah. So for me, I think the aspirations word there was super powerful, that you touched on, just to tap into the multiple ways that it can go, self-wise or business-wise, outcome, process, however way you want to cut it.
Yeah.
Just tapping into that mood of aspiration, it can take people onto a journey that you would get into some really powerful, meaningful discussions and sort of get to the purpose of why they're in the buyer's cycle anyway now. So yeah, that as a word to take away from the session, it's aspirations, and really brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to, as a little kind of nugget, I guess, to follow through with Brad is when we ask anybody, and this is in our relationships at home as well. So when we ask somebody what it is that they want, or what the outcome is, or what an objective is, or any kind of outcome-based thing, I want you to listen. You know how I said before, listen for what people are saying, but also what they're not saying, is to listen next time you ask that question and listen for whether or not they're saying something. Let me give you an example. So, what is an outcome that you want to achieve in your business? So always put context around it, in your business, for your business growth. Oh man, what I don't want to have is the amount of people that will answer that question, what do you want, and tell you what it is they don't want, is going to dictate whether they are somebody that is wanting to move away from problems, or whether they're somebody who is wanting to move towards something. Now, what happens is most salespeople will hear what they don't want and they'll go down a rabbit hole. But if you just, if you're listening and you just say, what is it that you want to achieve, blah, 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 and they say, oh, what I don't want is this, listen, and then just say, cool, so what is it you do want? And just guide them. And that's kind of one of the examples I was talking about with coaching. It's just guiding them. So I hope that kind of puts that into a little bit of perspective.
That is absolute gold. That's a little snapshot that's going up on LinkedIn. That is just right. And I'm embarrassed, but I'm going to say it. I hadn't put that 2 and 2 together. I hadn't figured that out. And I cannot wait for my next sales call, right? Because I'm going to try it out.
Awesome.
I'm pumped now.
You've got to tell me. You've got to give me feedback.
Yeah. I've got one this afternoon, so I'll give it a run while it's fresh in my mind.
Awesome.
Cool. Any other last questions? Otherwise, we will head off to a demo for anybody who wants to stay around and watch a demo about Flexile and how our system will help you sell more. But that's been amazing. Thank you, Bernadette.
That's okay. So if anybody does want to head across to 3redfolders.com and just click on the contact me, and more than happy to spend half an hour. So I'll kind of keep that open for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, awesome. What a great offer. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Well, thank you, Bernadette. Right. No need to stick around and watch the demo of Flexile. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. And that was absolutely fantastic. I'll speak on behalf of, as I can see a number of salespeople I know on the call, and I'm sure they all took out of it as much as I did. Really fantastic.
Awesome. Connect with me on LinkedIn, guys. We'll see you later. Have an amazing day.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
All right. Now, don't feel any obligation to stick around for a demo. We thank you for your participation. But if you'd like to see how Flexile works, feel free to stick around. Now, I'm sharing my screen here, and this is, for those of you who know Salesforce, not Flexile. Typically, I like to start a demo from CRM because I believe, all sales activity should be captured in CRM, and a great quoting tool is going to sort of flow naturally from what you're doing in CRM. So the example here is I've got an opportunity, very imaginatively titled webinar with today's date. I've got my test company and I've got a contact attached to it. And, I've done my activity, I've kept my notes, and I'm ready to do a quote. And so just launching Flexile from within the CRM at the right time pulls me through into Flexile, logs me in, creates a quote ready to go with the name of the opportunity, the company, and the contact, so I can get straight into quoting and jump straight into product. super fast, super easy. And by launching it from CRM, it means that we know which opportunity it's related to. We can make sure the right data is synced back to your CRM. You know, Bernadette was talking about how important your pipeline is. Well, this way it's going to keep it 100% accurate. So really great. So this is a managed network product, so a data product, for those who don't know. And data products are absolutely related to where you live. So, you know, if you've probably got NBN at home, you'll understand that based on where you live, you can have fiber to the node or fiber to the premise. And so if you're going to quote a service like that, the first thing you need to know is what's available. So we'll put a address in, just put the address of my office here in. And so then once I've got that data back, I can now start to pick the product I'm going to quote the customer. And so the idea of this is just building a quoting system that salespeople cannot misconfigure. If we select the bandwidth there, we'll select 100 meg, nice fast fiber service. And then I can select from one of these devices that needs to go on the end of it. And you can see there's 7 in the list there. So all of those 7 will work with this configuration. But if I ratchet the speed up to 500 meg, so that would be, you know, ridiculously fast for my home office, I've only got 2 devices I can put on the end. And that's because only 2 of them will handle the faster speeds. Now, a lot of salespeople can remember these sort of things, but that's also when you're under pressure or there's enough complexity, enough products, it's really easy to make errors. So this way, the system just guides you, stops you making errors. I'll select the one with 4G backup, so we can have 4G backup. Seems like a good thing in the age of webinars. And you can see here, I can select a different CPE or a different device for the backup, or I can select my primary one I've already got. And again, my list is filtered to only ones that support 4G. So again, can't misconfigure. And so there we go. I've got my service quoted. You know, the customer might not want to pay the upfront. In this example, I can just change it to a 36-month contract term to get a lower monthly rate and a 0 upfront. Once I've done that, I can just sync that back to my CRM. So, you know, all that work of updating all that product and price and info to CRM is done, you know, with one click of a button. I'll just refresh so we can see it there. See, now we've got a value against the opportunity and we've got a quote attached to it. We can click through that quote and we can see what's been quoted. And it's, like I said, it just means that your pipeline's accurate. And we're also not wasting salespeople's time doing things that, you know, they really don't need to and that a system can do for them. I will just show you a different type of quote in Flexile now, and I'll do a quote for a voice product. So again, that's brought me through to another quote. It's given it the same name, albeit you'll see it's actually got a different quote ID. I'll just tag it as voice so we can see it when we sync it across a little bit easier. And so this is more of a configurator. So previously we were looking at a bundle where we need to really manage that interrelationship between components in the bundle. We need to make sure it doesn't misconfigure. A configurator is different. A configurator is where we've got a group of products that we need to order together. And predominantly we want to make sure we don't miss something out. That's, you know, it's really common in sales that if there's a lot of things that need to work together, it's super easy to leave one item out. You know, they'll go out to deliver or to implement the service and it won't work. So this is just a nice structured way to take your salespeople through, a set of questions that will add the right product. So in this example, this would be for a hosted voice service. So if we imagine they're a small office, maybe 20 users. So, okay, there's, you know, how many users? There's 20. We'll just leave them on a standard voice plan, 36-month term. They might have 10 direct in-dial numbers, so 10 phone numbers they want to bring across. If they bring across 10 numbers, well, I mean, I know that's complex number porting. And then they might have, say, a 1-800 free in-dial number. We'll give them one of those. I'm not really sure how many people buy handsets anymore. I mean, I feel like all my phone calling is Zoom and mobile, but let's suggest these people are a bit old-fashioned. They have some handsets, maybe some video handsets for the execs, maybe a conference phone if they're still allowed to get into the office. So add one of those in. And then headsets. Headsets, I imagine, are a lot more popular. We'll give them 10 of those. And then you come to things like installation and training. So these can easily be calculations based on number of users, number of devices, some other calculation, or you can just manually enter them. I'll just enter them myself here because I don't have a calculation set up. And once I've done that, I can simply create products. So a nice structured way to run through your questions with the customer. I can then see all the products that I've added and I can view my quote and see what the quote looks like. So this is a customizable HTML template. You can see it's a very, you know, standard quote summary, all the line items that have been quoted. you might be talking to the customer and they might say, look, I'm not sure if I really need those handsets. They're a bit old fashioned. You just say, that's fine. We'll make those optional for you. So you can deselect them as you see fit. You go in now and we can see that those are selectable, so they can deselect them if they want. E-sign, obviously e-sign is really popular. You can put your details in and accept the quote, or print it out to PDF and then have a signing block, which will load up in a minute. There it is. Just making sure that customers can buy the way they want. If they're happy with e-sign, super easy. If they'd like to print it out and actually wet ink it, they can do that as well. So we'll just go through the e-sign just to show you a little bit of further integration. Obviously, spell my name correctly. So I've done that. Once I put my details up, I get the accept quote button. So just for e-sign, proper e-sign Australia, you've got to have some data entry before you can click the accept quote button. So that's now been accepted. And if I go back into this opportunity here and refresh it, we'll watch the status change. And see now Flexile sent a message back saying that's now closed won, and it synced the latest version of the quote. And so it always syncs on that last acceptance, it always syncs the latest version just to make sure in case the customer perhaps deselected some of those phones or made some changes to any editable fields, we get the latest version. And so then you get all the data in the quote and it moves on to the next step, whatever you're up to. So that's the demo of Flexile. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. It's a great tool for managing products and pricing as well. But ultimately, it's about helping you sell more. So that's what we tend to focus on. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Thanks for attending. And yeah, look forward to seeing you on our next webinar in 3 weeks' time.